Grant, welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Bob. Good to see you.
Aldonas from the
Pleasure.
Romney
Privilege.
campaign.
Yep.
Former alleged counsel, Undersecretary, Commerce, pundit, expert. You have a few comments, obviously, from the Romney perspective. Full disclosure here, I'm Romney's chairman for Maryland, so and Rob as well. So you had a triple header here, but you live this, you do this on a day-to-day basis.
I do.
Your comments with regard to both substance and sort of the real politics of what Senator Portman was just talking about. And you see a sort of a bottom line to a lot of the questions early on with the more labor-oriented panel, some of the questions today. Well, we can all agree on certain aspects of what needs to get done, but why can't it get done? Why does it not get done? What are the real issues with regard to moving pieces of legislation, regardless of who the president happens to be? So,
Bob, I have to thank you, and I have to say, first of all, thank you for the opportunity. Thank Gil for the opportunity, and thank you all for being here. Manufacturing is something near and dear to my heart. I come from Minneapolis. We happen to make things there. When I was in high school, all of us lined up outside of Doug Hansen's, our career counselor, or career destruction officer for some of us, but he uniformly told us we all should be going to work in the Ford plant in St. Paul, which is now closed. But for years and years and years, it was punching out Ford Ranger trucks, best-selling truck ever, pickup truck. And the irony is that provided a living for everybody who graduated from my high school class in the community. And it is time that we focused very hard on restoring the opportunity that things like the Ford plant in St. Paul created. So thank you for all of the investment of time. And going to your point, Rob, in terms of what Rob was saying, I agree completely in response to Randy's question about the importance of being on the shop floor. When I was Undersecretary of Commerce, I had the great pleasure of working with folks like Jerry Jasanowski and putting together probably the most in-depth study the United States has ever done about manufacturing. We held 22 roundtables around the country. We met with manufacturers from tool and die to auto manufacturing to semiconductors. We met with an awful lot of ancillary service industries who understood that their future was dependent on manufacturing. And what came away from that, I thought, was powerfully important because you met people like Jim Zawacki, who was making auto parts in Grand Rapids, and the Vermeer family in Iowa that has succeeded in global markets. And you also got the opportunity to go abroad and find out that when you were standing in the Great Hall of the People's Congress in Beijing, the rug underneath your feet was made by a US firm, Milken. And that was the power of manufacturing. It convinced me about the competitiveness of the sector, Bob, if we got the policy environment right. And we put forth a lot of prescriptions, which ironically are still being worked on in the Obama administration Commerce Department as we speak. I'm not taking credit for that, mind you. But the real important point is to galvanize, as Randy was suggesting, people to think hard about what manufacturing does. And to me, we all know that what it does in the sense of employment numbers and in terms of growth. But the one number I want to leave you with that I think is more important than other, as we've progressed in our thinking about what actually drives economic growth, it's innovation at the end of the day. And 90% of the patents in the United States come out of the manufacturing sector. If there's one reason I would say, as a response, Randy, to those who say manufacturing doesn't matter, microchips, potato chips, who cares? The thing is that we know innovation creates growth. And anything that undermines our ability to continue that innovation is necessarily bad for our economic health and bad for our national security at the end of the day. And so ultimately, that's the reason for the strategy. Now, reflecting on that, I want to talk a little bit about what I hear from manufacturers, and interestingly enough, just came back from China, and what I heard from Chinese manufacturers, who I think are more worried than our manufacturers are. Actually, happy to get into that at some point. But I think what manufacturers recognize is that it's the general health of the US economy that matters. It's not a special break. They're not looking for a handout. They understand that shifting the tax burden onto service suppliers or their customers is ultimately not good for manufacturers. What we actually need are a set of policies that drive growth. And until we get back to that, and that's across the board, it's tax, it's trade, it's the environmental stuff that Rob was talking, certainly our energy policy, until we get focused on those sorts of issues, it's a much heavier lift for our manufacturing sector until we get moving. So just a couple of thoughts about Governor Romney and his proposals. One is tax plan. It's the real deal. Not a lot of gimmicks. Basically, it cuts the marginal rate on incomes up to $200,000, which is a lot of small manufacturers who get treated, of course, as either LLCs or partnerships or other pass-through entities, so they're not taxed as corporations. So cutting the marginal rate has a big impact in terms of the return and their ability to hire employees. Second thing is to cut the corporate rate to 25% to make us globally competitive. As Rob was pointing out, as of April 1st, we will have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And the interesting thing about that, except with certain bastions of the Congressional Research Service, the entire economics community has come to realize that because capital is mobile in this system, the burden of the corporate tax falls on wages. It's the workers who pay. If you want a more regressive tax system, you keep the corporate tax rate high. If you want a more progressive income tax system, what you start to do is make our companies competitive and ensure that the personal income tax side adequately reflects the progressivity you want in terms of equity and fairness. The bottom line is also to move in the form of a territorial system, which everybody else in the world employs. I know from my own experience as a tax lawyer for many years that the foreign tax credit never compensates an American manufacturer for the taxes they pay overseas. There's always income exposed to double taxation under the current rules. So moving in a direction toward territoriality, as Romney has suggested, is a powerful incentive for our guys to compete for the 85% of purchasing power that Rob mentioned lies outside the country. On trade, I'm pleased, as a former Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade, to be speaking on behalf of a candidate who understands that the playing field isn't level, and yet believes that it's absolutely essential for us to be at the table trying to write the disciplines that cover the practices that the Chinese and others engage in. I'm glad to see that he's willing to take on the issue of currency. I'm also happy to see that he's interested in taking on what I think is a critical issue in terms of our intellectual property and going much further in terms of proposing disciplines. I also am pleased that he wants to go after the issue of state-owned enterprises, which is increasingly the largest trade issue that our companies face. Just to give you an indicator about it, you know, for those of us who are my age, you'll remember that we used to talk about the seven sisters in the oil industry. Now, if you look at the top 25 oil companies in the world, there is one private company, Exxon. It's not even in the top 20. The rest are state-owned. That'll give you an idea about what American companies now have to compete against in world markets. The bottom line, though, is if you go to the negotiating table as Obama has in the context of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and you're interested in protecting what you've bet on in terms of Solyndra, you pull your punches in terms of the proposals on state-owned enterprises. We can't afford to do that for manufacturing. If we're not willing to take up the cudgels on behalf of our manufacturers, we won't succeed. That has to be both playing strong defense in terms of our unfair trade laws, has to be playing strong offense in terms of the position we take at the negotiating table. So let me stop there, Bob, and throw it open for questions.
Open the floor.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
If Governor Romney is serious about
Hold on a second. Wait a second. We'll get you a mic. We have a mic close. Thank you.
if Governor Romney's serious about labeling China a currency manipulator, can either of you think of a better way to indicate that before he becomes president by encouraging Dave Camp to bring the House bill to the floor?
You know, I think it's a positive point. I think he wants to maximize the pressure, and I'm happy to take that back to the campaign as one of the messages, which I'm pretty sure the group is behind you on that one in terms of what needs to be done. Because, you know, the reality is that on currency, you know, you could make the argument Ben Bernanke is doing a pretty good job of manipulating our currency in the wrong direction, unfortunately. But here's the point, is that what we have to do is make sure that when you have China behaving as it does on currency, that we're not going to go after that. We also recognize that there is a far more serious problem that lies behind it in terms of their capital markets, which pay for an awful lot of excess capacity that then spills into our market. And until we tackle both those issues, we won't actually have grappled with what China represents on the financial side. So I'd love to see Dave Camp add something to that bill, which was not just currency, but actually goes after the subsidies that bring the excess capacity on the market and eventually affect our producers.
That message has been received in-house. We have time for one more question, unfortunately. Yes, sir. Yes.
Alan, this is like Old Home Week.
Grant, my man. Hi, I'm Alan Tonelson, and I'm with the U.S. Business and Industry Council, which represents nearly 2,000 U.S. domestic companies, most of them small and medium-sized manufacturers. Grant, I was really interested in Governor Romney's proposal to grant more trade preferences to countries that are more like us in terms of their own trade policies and their own economic structures. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but it's exciting to me because it clashes very strongly with the World Trade Organization approach of non-discrimination, which basically says no matter what this or that country is like, what its trade policy, we have to treat them all alike, which is ridiculous. It's great that Governor Romney has recognized this, and I'm wondering if this also means that that he's going to bow a great deal less to to the possibility of World Trade Organization vetoes over very sensible U.S. economic policies, for example, broadening Buy American regulations. Or is he thinking in much more limited terms?
No, actually, I'm glad you asked that, Alan. I think he's actually thinking in more expansive terms. And the irony is that in this administration, we haven't made use of the flexibility the WTO allows us. Not only in terms of what we would do in defense of our interests, but also in what we would do in taking advantage of the opportunity to reach agreement with a lot of like-minded countries and what I think should be a common commercial environment. The classic level playing field, a seamless, legally frictionless environment for those who are willing to play by the rules. And create an incentive to attract capital to that says to China and says to other countries that aren't willing to play by those rules, that there's a better option here, you'd be better off inside the system, discipline that process. I don't have a lot of hope that China's going to bite on that option. But in the meantime, what I think we would be doing as a part of that process is using the WTO rules to our advantage to create an environment where we can succeed as well as our most important trading partners can succeed on. So I think that's right. So I actually think he's thinking in more expansive terms about how you use the WTO as a way of trying to vindicate our interests at the end of the day.
Thank you all very much. Great. Thank you so
Bob.
much.
Yeah,
The bottom line we have different philosophical orientations in this room. We have certain common denominators. I know you would agree. You've lived it. And since the focal point of this election cycle will be jobs, fiscal issues, jobs, balancing the budget, and jobs, this is the time. This is the time and the place.
Absolutely.
And I think we can all agree with that. And that's why we're here today. So thank you all very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. Good to see you.